Okay, all right. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you to Josh and Chicago Bresla for organizing. So we're going to learn a Torah in Likutei Moharan tonight, in Torah Kuf Tzadi. This is in the first section of Likutei Moharan, called Torah Kuf Tzadi. It's a little bit interesting, this Torah. I find it to be a much easier piece of Rebbe Nachman to learn than the standard Likutei Moharan. The standard piece in Likutei Moharan jumps literally, like the whole world is in one piece. He jumps from one thing to another, like in a blink of an eye, and it's hard to follow how one thing connects to the next thing, and then it's back to the beginning and then to the end, and it's all over because he contained everything within him. This piece, though, is actually much more just simple, straightforward. He stays on one point, on one nakuda, and he tries to explain a few psukim that are about Matan Torah, which we're coming up to, and he explains them in a beautiful way. And I was specifically asked to speak on a topic that has to do with mental health related type things, life struggles, perhaps anxiety or different things of that nature. And so this piece, I think he doesn't name it explicitly, but I think in here is embedded a very, very interesting and important idea that has to do with what I would say as addressing or an antidote to impulsivity. So every single one of us has impulsive behaviors. Whether or not a person has a full-fledged addiction or just addictive tendencies or just impulsivities, but people have behaviors that they wish they didn't fall back on, but then yet time and time again they find themselves falling back on, and somehow they impulsively act in a certain way despite wishing they didn't, but in the moment it kind of happens impulsively. And I think that in this piece in Likutei Moharan, Rebbe Nachman has what I would consider to be, in a certain sense, an antidote to that, how we can kind of channel and overcome that, whatever that is for us in our personal life. So let's learn this Torah together, and it's also very, very fitting for Shavuos because it's about something that happens at Matan Torah. So Rebbe Nachman begins by quoting the psukim in Shmos Perek Yutes, where it says in the Torah, "Vayanu kol ha'am yachdav," that the whole nation of the Jewish people responded together. "Vayomer kol asher diber Hashem na'aseh." They said, "Whatever Hashem says to us, we will do." Vayashev Moshe's divrei ha'am el Hashem, and Moshe presents this. He returns these words. He gives over these words of the people to Hashem. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe. Hashem says to Moshe, "Hinei anochi ba elecha ba'av ha'anan." Hashem says to Moshe, "I'm going to come to you in a cloud." Ba'avor yishma ha'am b'dabri imach v'gam b'cha v'chulei. Hashem says to Moshe, "I'm going to come to you in a cloud so that the people can hear me speaking to you. I'm going to be speaking to you, but the people will be able to hear me speaking to you." Vayagid Moshe's divrei ha'am el Hashem, and Moshe tells Hashem what the people said. So this is very difficult to understand. So let's go over this one more time. I'm going to show you this in the Chumash. These psukim are very, very cryptic. It's difficult to understand what's going on here. So Hashem says to the Jewish people, this is where it starts with. Hashem says, "I'm going to give you the Torah if you take the Torah," right? He offers them the Torah. And Moshe and the Jewish people respond saying, "Everything you say to us, na'aseh, we will do," meaning we accept, we're committed, we're in, let's go for it. And then it says that Moshe takes these words and brings them to Hashem, to which Hashem says to Moshe, "I'm going to come in a cloud and speak to you so that the people can hear me speak to you." And then it says, "Vayagin Moshe," that Moshe says to Hashem that which the people said. And then Hashem says to Moshe, "Go and tell the people to prepare for getting the Torah." The people only said one thing, right? If we follow that sequence there, Bnei Yisrael only said one thing. They said, "Kol asher diber Hashem na'aseh." Whatever you said, we will do. We want to do it. We're in. We're committed. And Moshe tells that to Hashem. Hashem responds to that. And then it says, and Moshe told Hashem what the people said. But he already told Hashem what the people said, and the people only said one thing. So what does that refer to? What does it mean the second time when it says that Moshe said to Hashem what the people said? The people only said one thing. He already told that to Hashem. Hashem already responded to that. And then it says Moshe told Hashem what the people said again. So what's happening here? So Rebbe Nachman explains the following. So let's look together. V'hu tamua v'nifla ma'od. These psukim are a wonder, are puzzling. Kimahim divrei ha'am shenis. What's the second thing that Moshe says to Hashem, what the people said? Sha'leihem nemar, that it says about this, vayagin Moshe is divrei ha'am, that Moshe said what the people said to Hashem. Ki lo nimtza b'kasav shum manu udvarim. But it's not written in the Torah anywhere that the people said a second thing. Sheshivuhu ha'am shenis achar man harishon kol asher diber. They only said kol asher diber. Moshe already told that to Hashem, that the people are interested. Umazeshuv. So then, what does it mean again when it says vayagin Moshe is divrei ha'am el Hashem? That Moshe now tells Hashem again what the people said. So what's happening? So says Rebbe Nachman, Achda, you should know. Ki Yisrael tanu va'amru al masha amar lahem Moshe l'kabel Torah. When Moshe, so here's a very interesting read of the psukim now. Really, really incredible way of reading the psukim. Hashem said to Moshe, and Moshe said to the people, Hashem wants you to accept the Torah. Hashem wants to give you these commandments. Anu heim, so the Jewish people said, Kol asher diber Hashem naseh. Whatever Hashem says, we'll do. What did they mean when they said that? What were they saying? Klomar, meaning to say, Kol asher yidaber Hashem anu muchrachim lasos. They weren't saying that as like, yes, we're committed. They were saying that as a problem. The way Rebbe Nachman's reading the psukim. That Bnei Yisrael were saying it to Hashem as like, we're saying back to Moshe, like, of course. If Hashem is commanding this, what you think this is like a choice we have? God is literally speaking in a way that we can see explicitly with all these miracles happening, and we have the greatest prophet of all time that God literally speaks from his throat in a clear transparency. So Hashem is as if literally speaking directly to us, and God, the creator of the world, who just performed all these miracles and is so clearly, evidently true, is telling us what to do. That's not like a choice. Are we going to listen or not? That's just a given. We're going to listen. That's mukhrach. It's obvious that we're almost forced to listen. Mukhrachim lasos. We're forced to listen. That's what they were saying. Kol asher diber Hashem naseh. Anything Hashem says, if Hashem is saying it, naseh. Of course we're going to do it. Why? Because when this mitzvah comes out of the mouth of Hashem, there's no free will anymore. That's not Bahira. Now we're forced in our actions. And this is what it means when they said, Kol asher diber Hashem nasa bevadai. They were saying it as, they weren't saying it as like, yes, we're in. They were saying like, of course we're in. What's the question here? Ki ein shum b'chira shelo lasos. There's no free will about this. Because they heard Hashem speak directly. Va'al zenem artekef, and then it says immediately, Vayashe, afterwards, Vayashe Moshe's divrei ha'am el Hashem, that Moshe brought this to Hashem. But this wasn't an answer of saying yes. They were saying this as a problem. They were saying this as there's nothing to talk about now. If you speak to us so directly, it's a given. Sheheshiv HaKadosh Baruch Hu Tainas Yisrael. It was a taina. It was a claim. It was as if, in a sense, a problem. And Moshe brought this to Hashem. So what was Hashem's response? It flows in the psukim so amazingly. Because now what does Hashem respond? If you remember, we said before, Hashem's response to Moshe is, who am I going to speak to? I'm not going to speak to all the people. I'm going to speak to you. And they're going to know that I'm speaking to you. But it won't be as direct. Miyad Heshiv Lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So Hashem responds, Vayomer Hashem al Moshe, Hinei Enochi Ba'ilecha Daika, says Rebbe Nachman. Hashem is saying to Moshe, I'm going to come and speak to you, specifically to you. V'avor Yishma Ha'am V'dabri Imach, Daika, that the people should hear me speak to you. Hainu, what does this mean? Shelo Adaber Hadibros Rakim Chol. I'm only going to speak it directly to you. Kemoshe Kasav Anochi Hashem Elokecha Lo Yelecha V'chein Kulam. That Hashem said it in the singular. V'lo lenochach Yisrael. He didn't say it to all of the Jewish people. V'him rak yishmu b'dabri imach. They're going to hear me speak to you. There's going to be more separation between my speaking and the Jewish people hearing my command. And since there will be more space, there'll be a little bit of a buffer, as if, between my speech and the Jewish people hearing my speech, that will give them the space to have Bahira. Right? It's as if you've ever been to like an amazing speaker, one of these like just unbelievably charismatic, dynamic speakers who, when they're speaking, it's like everything else is like completely forgotten. There's nothing else going on. They're just so captivating. They're so deeply captivating and charismatic that when they're speaking, everything else is forgotten. and you're so swallowed up and enveloped by the ideas they're sharing because of how dynamic they are, that there isn't even really any critical thinking going on while you're listening. You're not really thinking so much for yourself. You're not analyzing it. You're not wondering if you really think it's true or not. You're just completely absorbed by it. Completely. And then you walk out, and sometimes you're like afterwards thinking about it, and you're like, well, that was an amazing experience. And then you start thinking about the ideas, and when you have questions, and you have follow-up, and you have things to add to it, and you have analysis, and maybe you even have criticism. You try telling it over to someone, and you realize, wait, I'm not even sure I fully understood that, or I fully agree with it, right? That's what the Jewish people were saying. They were saying to Hashem, if we hear you speak directly, right, lahavdil, endlessly, but if we hear you speak directly, the level of absorption that will happen to us, we won't even be, it's not even that we will be accepting the Torah. It'll just be that it's not even really us. We'll completely lose our sense of self. We'll be completely absorbed into how awesome, in the most literal sense of the word, it is to be in the presence of God speaking. So it's not even that we're choosing to listen to you. It's just that in that situation, in that context, there isn't even an us to have free will about. And that's what the Jewish people were saying to Hashem when they said, Kol asher diber Hashem naseh. If we hear Hashem speak, then there's nothing to talk about. It's just the self is completely deserted. And so then Hashem responds and says, okay, I hear. And Hashem says, fine. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm only going to speak to Moshe. You'll hear it. You'll know it's happening. But there'll be some space, enough space that there's still a sense of self that you have. So that your acceptance of the Torah, your commitment to the Torah is coming from you, yourself, and not just because your whole sense of identity became completely lost and completely forgotten because you got so absorbed and captivated into the moment of how dynamic and awesome that experience was. That buffer is going to allow for you to maintain a certain sense of self that can actually now be counted as Bahira, as choosing to follow what Hashem says when you commit to the Torah. That's what Hashem's response was. So that's the sequence here. So now look what Rebbe Nachman does with this. It's so brilliant. Right? That Hashem is going to that the Jewish people are only going to hear Hashem speaking to Moshe, and not directly to them. They'll hear me speaking, but again, there'll be enough space that they'll have some level of choice here, some level of being a self, of being an independent being. And that's what it then says afterwards. That Moshe then says over what the people said to Hashem. What do you mean? There wasn't another thing that the people said, and he already told Hashem. That was our initial question, right? Why does it say again that Moshe repeated the words of the people to Hashem? The people only said one thing. Moshe already told it to Hashem. So what does it mean when it says Moshe told Hashem what the people said? So listen to what Rebbe Nachman says. Hainu, what does it mean? Shemoshe tanes divrei ha'amel Hashem. That Moshe himself had the same taina. He was saying to Hashem, you solved the problem for the people. But what about me? The people now have a buffer, so they still have Bahira, because you're only going to speak to me, and they're going to hear it from a distance. So for them, there's still Bahira. But what about me? I'm hearing it directly. So I don't have Bahira then. I'm going to be completely transcendent of my own sense of self. I'm going to be completely absorbed and enveloped and swallowed up into the overpowering presence of Hashem. So there's no Bahira, there's no self. So the same issue the people had, Hashem, great solution. But what about me? So Moshe was saying the same thing the people said. That's why the people only said one thing, but Moshe repeated it twice. First time he said it to Hashem, and Hashem solved the problem. But then Moshe said, fine, good, but I have the same exact issue, but this time I have it for myself. Hainu mashetanu ha'am tchila, that which the people themselves had a taina, tanhu ata. Now Moshe himself had the same claim, el Hashem al atzmo, about himself. Ki tikanta es Yisrael. Moshe said to Hashem, you fix the Jewish people. You fix the issue for them. Shia lahem ha'bachira. Aydei shelo tidaber raki milavad. That they're going to have free will, because you're going to speak with me directly. Aval es atzmi lo tikanta, but you didn't solve it for me. Ki me'ata lo yeh li koach ha'bachira. I'm not going to have any choice. Me'achar shetidaber me, because you're going to speak directly with me. This is what it means. Vayagin Moshe is divrei ha'am el Hashem. This is what it means that Moshe told over to Hashem what the people said. That which they said that for themselves, now he's saying it for himself. What about me? I'm not going to have any mechira. So then what's the answer for Moshe? Heshivu Hashem responded to Moshe, the next psukim. Vayomer Hashem al Moshe, Leichel ha'am. Hashem says to Moshe, go to the people. V'kidashtam hayom u'machar, and have them prepare and be ready today and tomorrow. V'lo tziva lo Hashem yizbarach rak shnei yamim. So how many days did Hashem tell Moshe to tell the people to prepare for, as preparation until they would get the Torah? 2 days, today and tomorrow. Hayom u'machar. How many days though did they actually prepare for? 3. Famously because Moshe hosif lo yom echad midaito. Moshe added a day. Moshe hosif yom echad midaito. Moshe added a day, as the Gemara in Shabbos says. The kivin l'dasa kadosh baruch hu. Moshe figured out what Hashem really wanted. That Hashem really also wanted that it would be after 3 days. This was Hashem's will. The Torah wasn't given until after 3 days. This was the Bahira for Moshe. Meaning what? Let's keep going, we'll explain. The Jewish people wouldn't have been able to receive the Torah except after 3 days. But if Moshe wouldn't have added the 3rd day, they wouldn't have gotten it. But Hashem only told him 2 days. He had to figure out. He had to figure out and to choose to receive the Torah by adding a day. That through this choice that Moshe made, they received the Torah. And that was the Bahira for Moshe. Meaning what? And that's the end of this piece. Like I said, it actually stays focused. Usually it jumps all over the place. This piece is focused. So what does this mean? What he's saying is, I think, understand a little bit of it. What he's saying is that for the people, the problem was we don't have any area of Bahira because Hashem's presence is being so abundantly clear to us, so we have no choice. So Hashem says, fine, I'm not going to speak to him, I'm only going to speak to Moshe. So Moshe says, what about me? I don't have any choice. And Hashem tells him what to go do. But he leaves room for Moshe to figure out that maybe there's something that he needs to add. And that's the Bahira Moshe had. Meaning on what Hashem spoke explicitly, and Achanami, Moshe Rabbeinu didn't have Bahira because he heard it directly from Hashem's mouth, Kaviyachol. So what's the choice? He's completely captivated, completely absorbed. He has no choice. He hears it directly from God. But Hashem gives him a tzivoy that leaves open for him to find the detail or the area, the tiny space that he needs to exert his own sense of self. He needs to maintain, even within becoming completely absorbed and deserting of the self because it's such a transcendent experience, a self-transcending experience, he needs to hold on to a little bit of his own das to be Moshe Hosif Yom Echad Midaitu, that Moshe added a day for himself. And that was his Bahira. Okay, so it's an amazing pshat in the psukim, but what does this mean for us? So what's Rebbe Nachman really trying to teach us here? So thankfully, the not in this set, but a different set of Likutei Moharan that I have at home, on the bottom they have footnotes, and they bring different places that Rebbe Nachman speaks about the same inyan. Because as is well known in the writings of Rebbe Nachman, from all the different things that Rebbe Nachman put together, there's a variety of different svarim, and they all oftentimes connect. So there's something in Likutei Moharan that connects to a certain Torah in Likutei Moharan, and somewhere in Likutei Halachos, Rebbe Nachman expands on something that connects to a certain Torah. And if you're bucky enough, which I'm not at all, but the people who put together the footnotes, are able to connect the dots for us of where to look to continue delving further into a certain idea. So in the footnotes, they cite that in Likutei Halachos, there's a piece where Rebbe Nachman expands on the idea in Torah Kuf Tzadi. Torah Kuf Tzadi is what we just learned. So this is in Likutei Halachos, Hilchos Berachas HaShachar, Siman Hey, or Halacha Hey. And Halacha Hey is extremely long. It goes, over 100 different smaller sections. And in Sadi Dalet 94, he talks about this Torah. And he says something really amazing. He says, V'al Kain. So based on everything that was said until now, Maschilim b'Yom HaKippurim Kol Nidre. Why do we start Yom Kippur with Kol Nidre? Yom Kippur with Kol Nidre. Why? Where does that come from? What's that about? So he says, Ki Iker HaTshuva Nimshach Misham Mibechinas Nidarim v'Hatarasim. Because tshuva originates. Tshuva starts from the bechina of Nidarim. Nidarim is vows. So tshuva starts from there. Why? And the main source of that is the tzaddik emes, and in the Bahira of Moshe. What does this mean? Ki ikir pigam kol hachatayim hu shepagam bebechinas neder u'shvua. The main pigam, the main flaw that is the source of all the different chatayim, sins that we fall to, is that we are pogim, that we injure the bechina of vows and oaths, neder u'shvua. Ki kol mitzvos haTorah kibalnu bebris u'shvua. Because really, if you think about it, all of the Torah, all of our acceptance of the Torah, our commitment to the Torah, originates in a vow. Naseh v'nishma, or Naseh, depending on which area in the Torah. Right? This, in what we just read, it just says Naseh. Elsewhere, it says Naseh v'nishma, but it's the same thing. When the Jewish people accept the Torah, Hashem says, do you want the Torah? And they say, yes. That moment, that's a neder in a sense. So the acceptance of the whole Torah is a bechina of a neder, of a vow. I've uttered a commitment to something, which created my commitment to all of the details of the Torah. So every single detail of every single mitzvah and halacha really comes down to a neder. Because the Jewish people had a choice. They could have said no to the Torah. And we know that the other nations of the world didn't accept it. Amar Rabbi Usainu Zal, as it says in the Gemara in Avodah Zarah, al pasuk v'zarach miseir lama, that they darshan from that pasuk, melamed shehechzer Kadosh Baruch Hu es haTorah, that Hashem went around to the different nations and brought the Torah, and the ikar kabbalas haTorah b'tchilas mizeh b'chinas neder. So when we accept, we had a choice, and if we had a choice, it means that when we said yes, we made a commitment with our mouth. We took upon ourselves, in a sense, a vow, the vow of yes, we are committed to the Torah. Shekibluhu me'atzma b'li hechreach, without being forced. That's the letter that's the bechina of a neder, of a vow to accept the Torah before being commanded. We voluntarily accepted it. That's what a neder is. But immediately upon accepting it, upon taking this vow, the moment that we had the Bahira, we had Bahira to accept it. But the moment we accept it, now everything becomes an obligation. So it's kind of, in a sense, there's a paradoxical experience here. Because it's a choice to accept it. Once you accept it, we're accepting that we're now obligated in everything. So if we don't keep a certain mitzvah, if we don't fulfill something, then what did we really injure? What did we really inflict upon? Really, the injury is to that initial neder where we said, Nasa v'nishma. We said, yes, we accept it. And this is what we were just learning about. That the real source, the root, the deep root of Bahira comes from the original acceptance of the Torah, which happened on the third day, only because Moshe, on his own volition, came up with adding a third day. It's a crazy thing. Hashem said to Moshe, prepare yourselves today and tomorrow. To have a third day. Where did Moshe get the audacity to think to add another day? Hashem said, prepare yourself today and tomorrow. But Moshe understood somehow, through his own intuition, through his own knowledge, he somehow understood, he intuited, he knew that I'm supposed to add something to what Hashem said. I'm supposed to add a third day. But that's where Moshe's choice was. That's where the Bahira was. Because as we learned in Torah Kuf Tzadi, even though the choice was taken away from Moshe because he heard everything directly from Hashem, his choice was that there was space for him to add something. So now in Likutei Halachos, it's referencing what we just learned in Likutei Moharan, in Siman Kuf Tzadi. Ayin Sham Heitev, the Haven Heitev, understand it well, I hope we try to. The Hainu Shetzarach Lahaven Midaito, that a person needs to understand from his own das. You need to use your own knowledge, your own intuition, your own experiences, your own perspectives, your own thoughts and ideas and feelings and understandings of things. You need to use that to understand to understand what Hashem wants even before it's explicitly commanded. So how does that make sense anymore? How is this relevant to us? I understand before the Torah was given, maybe I needed to do that to intuit what Hashem wanted from us. But nowadays, we already have the Torah, we already have Shulchan Aruch, we already have the Mishnah Berurah, we already have clear what we're supposed to do. So what does it mean now that I'm supposed to intuit and figure things out? It was already commanded. What's left for me? So it says Rebbe Nachman, "Va'afilu achshav shekvar nisna Torah," that now even though the Torah was already given, v'yesh l'chol echad b'chira pshuto, every person has choice. The choice now is, do I do what the Torah says or do I not do what the Torah says? When it comes to how am I going to fulfill the Torah? And what path am I supposed to take? Now I find this very interesting, actually. I haven't had a chance. I have to speak to somebody who's really a bucky, and I should have spoken to Rav Chaim Kramer when he was here, asked him about this, but I didn't think of it. Somebody who really is really holding Rebbe Nachman, because typically Rebbe Nachman does not consider it an option to go in the way of philosophy. Like it's not an option. It's not on a table. It's not like there's two ways, and one of them is in the way of mechakarim, of philosophy. That's not an option. It's on the table. But here in this is one place. I don't know enough to say this, but the one place I'm familiar with where he says it in a way that sounds like it's an option. He says a person has to figure out for themselves, what's the way for me to go? And then he lists, is it the way of those who are choker, those who inquire, that's typically the language used for philosophers. Is it the way of the philosophers, the more intellectual way? Or, actually I don't really like the use of that term, because the other ways are also very intellectual. Sometimes, depends. That's a complicated topic. Anyway, that's tangential. Or in b'derech ha-mekubalim, or in the way of the mekubalim. Is it the way of the philosophers or the way of the mekubalim? So a person has to figure out for themselves, which way is the way for me? And I also have to figure out for myself, who's the right tzaddik for me to connect to? Who's the right Rav, the right Rebbe, the right Rosh Hashiva, the right tzaddik, the right mekubal for me to connect to? Who am I supposed to connect to? There's many of them. Hashem gives us in every single... What do you say?
Can we ask questions?
Yeah, sure.
I don't know if I can interrupt you. First off, I have a question in terms of accepting the obligations. Is it all or nothing? It sounds like it's like you got to do all of them, or just you're not good enough. You can't do this.
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
That's a good question.
The other question was, I forgot it because I was hoping you would have the answer to that one. Okay, I'll come back to it.
Sorry.
About what you were just talking about. Okay.
Initially, he said that now he's saying it's a netter, but before they were saying it's not a netter. They're just making an observation that we have no choice, right? So which is it? Is it a netter?
So in the end, it's a meaning. I think the idea is that based on what he said in Likutei Moharan, if Bnei Yisrael would have heard it directly from Hashem, then there's just no choice. But Bnei Yisrael's taina was that's not the way it should be, and Hashem agreed to them, and so Hashem made it that it was removed from them, and so now it is a neder when they accept it. I think that's the idea, that it does become a neder because they said we don't want it to be so direct. If it's so direct, we're not going to have any choice in the matter. Then it's not even really a neder. It's just the absolution of any sense of self. It's just a dissolving of self. That's not a commitment. That's just I'm not even here anymore. But Hashem recognized that it was makabel that, and so He created this buffer so that the Jewish people would now actually have a sense of self in their choice to commit, and so therefore it is a neder. I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
When you say people have the choice, is that like the 70 paths in Torah, and choosing that sadi?
That could be. Could be that's the same idea. Yeah, 100%. Yes. Yeah. The Gemara in Shabbos, right, says that Dvar Hashem is compared to that when Hashem spoke, it was compared to Kipatish Yifose Sela, right? It was like a hammer hitting a rock and shattering into 70 different ways of understanding it, right? So everything Hashem said shattered into 70, and 70 is representative of more than 70, but it shattered into many pieces of the same initial rock. So it's the speech of Hashem, but it shatters into many pieces, so everyone understands it in a different way. Yeah.
Well, if it's shattered, how do you find the pieces though? Like we're all shattered in our own way, so it's a life journey, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, so my other question is, sorry. So Rabbi Torsky spoke today at his share that the woman received the Torah first. So does that mean, I was just thinking for your topic of impulsivity, if men received it second, is that why they're more impulsive and why there's higher rates of ADHD?
I don't know. Why would it mean that? Why would that tell? What's the thinking?
When you receive something first, you have you're taking it in, and just how women were designed, we have that bina, and because men, nothing to insult men, but you're created in your own way too, and it's just a different way that Hashem created you. So,
are you saying not specifically because they was second?
Well, I don't know, but I was thinking maybe it's related.
Maybe? I don't know. Okay, so he says, so a person has to figure out their own way. So coming back to this idea, so what he's trying to focus on here is after the Torah is already commanded, so where's the Bahira now? If it's already commanded, where's the Bahira? Right? So it's similar to what I understand. The way I'm understanding is similar to the point that the Rebbe makes. The Rebbe says that there's two different versions of Bahira Chavshis. I mentioned this Friday night. Two different versions of Bahira Chavshis. Two different levels, really, of Bahira Chavshis, of free will. One level of Bahira Chavshis is to say, Hashem commanded me this, so I want to do X. Hashem wants me to do Y. Right? Or Hashem wants me to do Y and I don't want, whatever it is, right? I want to do something Hashem says not to do it, or I don't want to do something Hashem says to do it, so I have a choice in front of me, right? Now that's free will, right? So I'm going to choose to do what Hashem said because this is what Hashem said, so I should do what Hashem said. I have my desire versus Hashem. I should do what Hashem said, right? That's one level of Bahira Chavshis. But the Rebbe says there's a higher level of Bahira Chavshis. The higher level isn't that I have a choice in front of me. Do I do what Hashem said or do I not do what Hashem said? The higher level of Bahira Chavshis is, hold on a second. If Hashem said to do something, what's the choice even? What's there to talk about? Hashem said to do something. Of course I'm going to do it. Okay, so then where's the free will? The free will is to accept that I don't have free will. That's the higher level of free will. The higher level of free will is to surrender my free will. Is to say...
To do His will.
To do His will. Is to say that I don't even have a choice anymore. So then where's the Bahira? But the Bahira is to say I don't even have a choice anymore. That if I know what Hashem wants from me, so then there's nothing to talk about. That's the higher level of free will. The free will is to give up my free will, but I have a choice in that. I can choose to give up my free will. And to surrender myself to recognize that if Hashem wants something from me, that's not even a choice anymore. Of course I'm going to do it. So it's more almost of like a meta free will, right? As opposed to like the specific, detail, instance free will. So I think the way I'm understanding some of what's happening here is that this is what Rebbe Nachman and Rebbe Nachman are trying to address. After the Torah is given already, so where's the free will? Of course I'm going to do it. So the Rebbe said, the Lubavitch Rebbe says it's about giving up the free will in this more general meta way. But what Rebbe Nachman is saying is that we still have a tremendous amount of free will because, yes, we know what Hashem wants from us, but there's, as you mentioned, 70 different ways. Really, there's many, many different ways of how we go about doing that. For many different people, there's different ways of doing it. There's different ways to daven. There's how many shuls are there in West Rogers Park, right? There's many, many different ways to daven and different ways to connect. There's different Rabbonim to connect to, different aspects of Torah to learn from. Torah is an endlessly vast body of options, right? Torah is not constricting. I once I heard in a recording from Rav Soloveitchik, Rav Yosef Soloveitchik. He said someone was talking about how limiting Torah can be. He said the more halacha a person knows, the more intricacies of the Torah a person knows, the bigger Talmid Chacham a person is, the more they recognize how much space there is within the world of Torah. There's a tremendous amount of variation. There's a tremendous amount of color within Torah. This is not a completely liberal take on this, right? There is a box somewhere, right? There are edges to that somewhere. There are things that are part. It's not a pure relativism type of approach, but there is a plurality of very real and authentic and genuine paths within Torah. And that's what Rebbe Nachman is saying, is that that's where the Bahira stands, even after the Torah is already given. So after the Torah is given, we're told the black and white aspects, the kind of the nuts and bolts of like what has to happen in the life of a person who's committed to Torah. But there's a tremendous amount of variation of how that actually comes to life and how a person does that. And sometimes I think what happens, and this is what we'll keep learning in a second, and talk about the upshot soon. But I think sometimes what happens in so many different educational systems, in so many communities in different ways, probably not necessarily intentionally, but sometimes unfortunately what happens is that this huge array of varieties of how a person can live as a real and authentic and committed Jew becomes much more narrow than it really is. And that leads to all sorts of problems. And what Rebbe Nachman is talking about here is finding my personal flavor, my personal connection, my personal path within Avodas Hashem. And that's where my Bahira stands even after the Torah is already given. And he learns that from this whole idea of Moshe Hosif Yom Echad Midai, that Moshe added a day by himself. Because what the people were emphasizing is that there needs to be Bahira. And Hashem was maskim. Hashem agreed to the taina of the people, to the claim of the people, and said, you're right, there needs to be Bahira, there needs to be a sense of self. And then Moshe himself said, okay, so what about me? And Hashem even agreed to Moshe, even you have to have an area of choice. And so Moshe had an area of choice by finding where could he add something that was his, even though everything that Hashem told him, he heard directly. So he, in a sense, had no choice in the matter, because he heard directly from Hashem. But there had to be something that he could add that would make it, that was personal to him. Yeah.
I'm just wondering when you said at first that Hashem spoke to them and it was so enveloping, and yet, as you know, Moshe said, wait a minute, what about me? Is there somewhat of, like Hashem speaking to the neshama within the people? And if it had just been the neshama within the people, then they, that he was speaking to, but we live in a goof in this world, and that's where we need to find our path in this world, versus just, the Hashem speaking just to our neshama as if to angels.
Right. I guess for the people though, they were still in their guf, and they were at that time, and they were
Right.
saying that even though we're in our guf, if we would hear from you directly, we would be so the guf would be so forgotten about, right?
That's what I
That
mean.
right,
Yeah.
right. So I guess that was still the taina. Even though they were in the guf, it would have been completely
They were,
absolved.
their neshama was just totally immersed.
Yeah. Okay, so he says, a person needs to figure this out for themselves. If a person looks at their end, at the ultimate destination, and a person will figure out for themselves. They'll see the path. The path will become enlightened. That they'll be able to see the way that they're supposed to go. As it says in he's referencing one of the Torahs in Likutei Moharan. Okay, skip a little bit here for a second. And then he says, and all of this is the level, is the bechina of a neder, of a vow. Going back to that. Why? So I think, we'll stop this piece here. I think what he's saying and why he was emphasizing the fact that there's this vow, the neder, that all of Torah really comes from a neder, is really interesting if you think about it, because what he's almost doing is we relate to Torah as a mitzvah, it's a commandment. So once we're commanded, we're commanded. But what he's almost bringing back is the fact that there's an element of choice to the commandment, because we chose to accept to be commanded. And it seems, if I'm understanding correctly, it seems almost as if Rebbe Nachman is trying to bring more of a personal choice to the acceptance of Torah, even after we already accepted the Torah. Meaning, why is he emphasizing this idea that all of Torah really comes back to a neder? Because he's trying to resurface that even after we accepted it, we should still have, in a certain way, a consciousness of the fact that we accepted it. We chose to accept it. For some reason, he thinks that that's extremely important. Rebbe Nachman seems to be emphasizing here in a variety of different ways. Each time he says it is a slightly different angle. But the nucleus, kind of what all these different points surround, the common denominator, is that he seems to be emphasizing that there's a really there's a big importance to the fact that we have a sense of autonomy in our experience of Torah, that there's actually choice to it. Whether it's by remembering the initial neder, that we chose to be commanded, and so even though then it becomes a commandment, but we chose to be commanded, so there's choice in that. Or it's in the sense that we have to figure out within the realm of Torah, we have to figure out for ourselves how we're going to fulfill the Torah, what the right path for us is. But either way, what he's emphasizing is the sense that there needs to be choice in it, that there needs to be a sense of self in the experience of being an Eved Hashem. And I want to learn one more piece from Likutei Moharan about this, and then I want to try and explain a little bit of what I think maybe why he's emphasizing. I don't know for sure, it doesn't say explicitly, but maybe an idea as to why he thinks this is so incredibly important. Yeah.
I was just going to say, and you might be answering this already in a minute, but that when you have a choice, that perhaps that choice is, like, you don't have a choice and you build resentment, and then you're following and you're coming from completely a place of your act.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's a choice, then you can come to it with, like, chose this, I'm
Right.
excited, and
Right.
it's this simcha.
Right,
And
right.
that's a,
Yeah,
like a
I think
different
that's a
vibrational.
big part of it. Yeah, for sure. Okay, so in
So,
yeah.
What was going on historically at that time? Like, did he know, he was tapped into like Klal Yisrael, that they were all robots?
Rebbe Nachman's time, you're saying?
Yeah.
Could be that he thought that people were kind of going about things, too robotically. I don't know. It could be that was part of what he was
Missing.
observing. Yeah,
Like,
maybe.
Like they might look like from Jews on the outside,
Mhm.
but they're neshama.
Mm-hmm. Maybe. Yeah. So in Likutei Moharan, in Siman Kuf Tzadi Zayin, it says here the following: Yom Sheni Chaf Daled Iyar. It was Monday, the 24th of Iyar, B'Uman, in Uman. Hayamidaber Imi. Rebbe Nachman says that Rebbe Nachman was speaking to me. The Amar Shaba'itim Halalu, that in these times, Hu Chafetz Ma'od L'Salik U'Lahashlich Me'ito Ha'olam. Rebbe Nachman says, in these times, I want to run away and get rid of the world from around me. Hainu Shehu Rotze Livchor Makom Leishev Levado Ba'atzma, meaning he wanted to live by himself in isolation. Below Yiyah Alav Ol Ha'olam, he didn't want to have the burden of the world on him. That's what Rebbe Nachman said. V'amar ki hu choshev she'im lo hayamaschal b'tzchila be'inyan hanhagas ha'maforsim efshar hayamagila masha hayamagia. He said it's possible that if I wouldn't have engaged in a public leadership role, that it's possible that I would have been able to reach something much greater. V'amarti lo, so Rebbe Nachman says, but I said back to Rebbe Nachman, hello Moshe Rabbeinu olav Hashem haya osei gam kem b'zeh. You're telling me you think it's it was a bad choice to engage in public affairs, but Moshe Rabbeinu did that. That's how he was Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu. He was engaged in leading Klal Yisrael. L'karev b'nei Adam LaHashem, to bring people closer to Hashem. So Heshes Rebbe Nachman said back to Rebbe Nachman, Hello gam Moshe Rabbeinu olav Hashem shaga b'zeh. Even Moshe though had some sort of way that he made a mistake in this because of that. How? Ki gam Moshe nenash al shekerav es ha'erev rav. That Moshe Rabbeinu got too engaged in being makarev the erev rav, and that led to all sorts of problems. So Rebbe Nachman saying, you see, even Moshe Rabbeinu, he made a mistake in this. He got too involved in whatever that means in some way. So Rebbe Nachman was saying to himself, I don't know, maybe it feels sometimes like I got too involved in the public and too involved in being makarev others, and it held me back from reaching where I could have gone. So then Rebbe says, the Amar. Rebbe Nachman said, Ki ha'ikr ha'avoda sheyesh b'chol davar, the main avoda in everything, ma shemanichem la'adam ha'bachira shalo, is to leave a person space for choice. Hainu shenishar hadavar al daito, that you should leave it to be for their das. Ve'ein bo mitzvah, and don't command them to do something. Hainu she'ein mitzavin oso al oso hadavar shum mitzvah. Don't force, don't impose. Ve'ein omer lo klal lasos. Don't tell him what to do. Rak shenishar hadavar al daito. Leave it to their choice. Leave it to their mind. Sheyasa kafi ma sheyivchar lo, that they'll do what they choose. V'zeh b'chinas, and this is the b'china of what we've been talking about from the Gemara in Shabbos. Hosif yom echad midaito hanever Moshe. That Moshe added a day from himself. Shezos ha-b'china hi nimtzeis b'chol avoda v'avoda. And in every single thing we do, there's an area in which there's a b'china of Moshe adding a day on his own. Ki b'chol avoda me'avodas Hashem, that in every avoda of avodas Hashem, yesh davar shemanichin u'mash'irin la'adam b'li mitzvah v'azhara. There's something that's unknown, something that's not explicit yet. There's some aspect. So yes, we know you eat matzah and you don't eat chametz on Pesach, but there's something in there that is undefined. We know that you daven, and we know that there's the siddur tells us what to daven, but there's something in that is left gray or left open-ended, left with variation, with possibilities. The ein mitzavin alav sheyasa kain. And we don't tell everyone exactly how to do the specific thing for each person in the exact same way. Rak hadavar tali b'daito u'b'chiraso. We have to leave it. We have to leave that space for people to choose on their own. Kama Moshe Rabbeinu olav Hashem shehosif yom echad midaito b'li mitzvah. V'ayin Likutei Aleph Simin Kuf Tzadi Mizeh. And that's the piece that we started with in Kuf Tzadi. U'bezos habachina hi ikar ha'avoda v'habachira. And this is the ikar avoda of bachira. Ki nishar mesupok tamid eichu ritzon Hashem yisbarach me'achar shalotziva alav eich lasos. So again, this idea that in terms of doing what Hashem said, that becomes a davar pashut. If we reach this higher level of bachira to do what Hashem wants from us, of course, what's the choice in the matter? The only reason that we ever have a question, it's a very Interesting point. The only reason that we ever even have a question of should I do what Hashem wants from me is because we're not thinking about Hashem. Meaning, if I have a clarity, a full, total, and complete clarity that Hashem said to do X, there would be no choice about doing X. Or if Hashem said explicitly and directly to me, don't do Y, then of course I wouldn't do Y. That wouldn't even be called Bahira. The reason we experience it as Bahira is because we might not have enough of an experiential sense or enough of a belief and a tangible belief that Hashem actually said to me, not in some conceptual, but to me, in 2022, living in Chicago, said to me, Yakov Danishefsky, don't do X. Right? Like he actually said that to me. If I felt and experienced that, then there wouldn't even be a choice about not doing X. The problem is it's hard to experience it that way. But the second I would experience it that way, if I really meditate on that, the way that it says that Reb Zusha did when he read the words V'yedaber Hashem el Moshe Lemor, that if I would really experience that, if I would, even the Rambam, I always find it fascinating. In the Perish Mishnayos, the Rambam, when he quotes Psukim, he doesn't say that the Torah says or the Pasuk says. He says Amar Hashem. Hashem says. Right? When he quotes Psukim, the Rambam in the Perish Mishnayos, it's very interesting. If we would experience that, there wouldn't be Bahira about that. So there's no Bahira, if we reach that level, there's no Bahira of do I do what Hashem said or not. But there's Bahira, and there's tremendous Bahira in how I do what Hashem said. How am I Mekayim that? How do I manifest that and bring that to life in a way that's personal to me, in a way that's real to me, that brings to life my kochos, my unique personality, my unique life circumstance and experiences. And that's the real Bahira that we're striving for. And that's what Rebbe Nachman is emphasizing so much here. And I think, as you were mentioning, I think the reason why maybe this is so important and why I titled this that this personal expression as an antidote to impulsivity is because there's Lahavdil, in whom I'm quoting from, but there's a psychological theory of human development by someone named Erickson. It's known as Erickson's theory of human development. And what he writes about is that at each stage of life, there's a different crossroads or a different crisis, as he calls it, that a person is facing. So in the beginning of life, there's trust versus mistrust, and then there's different stages along the way. The adolescent stage is a stage of what's called, different terminology for it, but I'll call it individuation versus enmeshment. Right? Do I have a sense of self, or am I just an extension of my family, or my parents, or my society, or my community? Do I have personal expression? Do I matter as an individual, or am I just forced to do what I'm being forced to do? That's the stage of adolescence. Unfortunately, what I think happens very often is that specifically at adolescence, societally, and especially in certain circles, is when we actually clamp down more on a sense of individuation. And so what then happens is that a person has an innate need, and this is where Rebbe Nachman understands so deeply in Lahavdil, understands it better than any of the psychology can understand it. Rebbe Nachman understands that a person has an innate need because of their shorish neshama, because of the nitzots that they are, because of the chelik elokam imal that they are. A person has an innate need. It's not a luxury, it's a need to have personal expression, for their self to come alive. But if we're not given the healthy ways to do that, the permission to do that in a way that feels holy, if we're not given the platform and the direction to say you're supposed to do that, and we want you to do that, and here's the range of ways that can be done, and tell us about a new way that we haven't even thought of yet. We want to hear your new way of doing it that we hadn't thought of, and we want to entertain it, we want to explore it, and we want you to figure that out. And you have to be Moshe Hosef Yom Echad Midaito. The Torah said 2 days, but you have to think of adding the 3rd day, whatever that means in each person's life and each specific thing. If a person doesn't experience the permission, and not just permission, but the encouragement to do that, the empowerment that they're supposed to do that they have to have a sense of Bahira, and instead they're clamped down that there's no sense of Bahira. So then what happens is that innate need that a person has for self-expression doesn't go away, doesn't suddenly disappear because it wasn't allowed out. What happens is it comes out sideways. It comes out in all sorts of ways without permission. And that's what impulsivity is. Impulsivity is doing something without permission. I'm doing it without my own permission. Why do I not have permission? Because I'm not thinking that I'm allowed to do anything with permission, because I'm not given the opportunity and the encouragement to say that I'm supposed to explore my own and figure things out for myself and have a sense of Bahira and realize that all of this was a neder and all of this was something that we accepted and all of this has so much variety that I should explore and I should figure out what works for me and who I connect to and where I go and how I learn and how I daven and which mitzvahs are my mitzvahs and in what way I do those mitzvahs. We don't have any of that sense. And so that innate need, again, it doesn't disappear. It comes out, but it's going to come out without permission. And that's impulsivity. And so what Rebbe Nachman is trying to guide us towards is to recognize that the Torah is vast and the Torah is wide and deep, and there's so much nuance and complexity and variety and options within a proper framework. And within that space that a person is supposed to be able to explore how they do that and how they individuate themselves and how they have a sense of Moshe, Hosef Yom Echad, that I have my own Bahira. And if a person does that, so then Hashem should help us all that if we're able to do that, so then many of those impulsive actions that we're habituated to become so much less relevant to us, so much less enticing, because we're not involved in those things anymore. Again, if it's a more intense version of impulsivity that's crossing over into the world of addictive tendencies and addiction, it's of course a lot more complicated than this. But even in the most extreme cases like that, this nekuda is still true, right? When I work with people who are struggling with addiction, this is a major part. I don't necessarily go through pieces in Rebbe Nachman, but this is a major part of recovery. A major part of recovery is figuring out your healthy sense of self-expression, not just what not to do, not just how do I stop doing this behavior. If we focus on stopping to do a behavior, we need to do that. We need to have that sor meira aspect of it. But if that's all we do, then it's just a matter of willpower that's going to eventually expire. What we need to really focus on is how do we have the asay tova? How do we have that we reclaim the lost sense of self that fell into these impulsive things? How do we pull it out of that and elevate it into a healthy sense of personal expression that allows us to optimize, that allows us to maximize the unique role that we were given in this world of our own version of Moshe Hosef Yom Echad. And I think maybe that's a little bit of a small drop of understanding of Rebbe Nachman's trying to get at in these three pieces. In Likutei Moharan, Torah Kuf Tzadi, in Likutei Halachos Berachas HaShachar Hey, and in Chai Moharan Kuf Tzadi Zayin. Hopefully that's a little bit of truth of understanding what he's trying to teach us.
So it comes out then, so this whole thing, we always say that this is like such a banner for us, right?
Yeah.
But according to Rebbe Nachman, it's a complaint.
Yeah, it was a complaint. Yeah, he's a totally different read of the subject.
Okay,
yeah.
but even if it's a complaint, why did Hashem? Even according to him, it should be a big deal that phrase. So why did Hashem design it that way? And it sounds like it's designed it that way so that we should have a desire so that we can actually properly make the neder.
Yeah,
it's like a very Breslov thing, like a desire to desire.
Yeah, very good.
And so it's even more
powerful.
Exactly.
In a sense.
Right.
So it's the clarion call to re-accept from a place of actually making the choice to accept, as opposed to we accepted and now we're just in it.
Right. So it's deeper than all the other the general. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Shkaya.
Shkaya.
Thanks for coming.
You're going to teach them the